Hi everyone, this is our first lecture for History 111, World History to 1500 at Central Piedmont Community College. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the earliest hominid species, the migrations of humans outside of Africa and into Eurasia, the Pacific, and the Americas, the culture and day-to-day lives of our earliest Paleolithic ancestors, and finally about the agricultural revolution that led to the first settlements and eventually to civilizations. As you view this video lecture, I recommend pausing it periodically and, when necessary, taking notes on the important terms from the lecture. These important terms can be found listed on the course webpage. We are going to cover the majority of human history, a full 95%, in just the first lecture we're having on prehistoric people. And if this sounds a little bit strange to you, let me try to explain it with a visual that's a bit more understandable to the human mind. Let's pretend that all of human history happened in the span of 1 year's time. January 1st would mark the origin of the Earth. By the end of February, the first simple cells appear. All the way through the spring and the early summer, simple plants enrich the atmosphere with oxygen. Around mid-August, complex cells emerge, and coral appears in the ocean. Beginning in mid-November, the ocean fills with multicellular life forms. In the last few days of November, freshwater fish appear, and the first vascular plants begin to grow on land. About December 1st, amphibians venture onto dry land. The great swamps that form today's rich coal beds existed between December 5th and 7th. On December 12th, the largest of the Earth's mass extinctions wipes out 95% of all species. Life bounces back, and dinosaurs evolve on December 13th. Flowering plants come on the scene on December 20th. In another great extinction, the dinosaurs disappear shortly before midnight on December 26th, opening a space for modern mammals to emerge on the 27th. On the evening of December 31st, about when you might gather with friends for the evening celebration, the first hominids evolve in East Africa. At 10 minutes to midnight on December 31st, about when all the New Year's partygoers are really starting to watch the clock, Neanderthals spread throughout Europe. At 1 minute to midnight, agriculture is invented. The Roman Empire fills just 5 seconds and collapses at 11:59 and 50 seconds, the moment when the New Year's ball starts to slide down the pole at Times Square, and the great 10-second countdown begins. In the last 2 seconds before midnight, we enter the modern industrial era. In those last 2 seconds, we find the explosive growth of the human population, the rise of complex technologies, and what might be called a globalized human culture. The entire history of the United States fits into the last second of this narrative. The rise of capitalism, big business, and the petroleum era of cheap and plentiful energy is crammed into that last half of a second as we are holding a deep breath, ready to shout our start of a New Year's greeting. The fireworks start as our dash through Earth's history brings us to the current moment, right here and now. To put this in further perspective, most people think that what Americans have been doing for the 2 seconds since the Industrial Revolution is the normal, natural, and maybe even the only way to run a society. They are considered normal, but they are really stark raving mad. If we keep flowing in our compressed race through global history, by the time we have finished shouting Happy New Year, we are already 200 years into the future. The available supplies of oil will have been exhausted, and the effects of global climate change will have taken dramatic hold. If our current way of life continues, a huge percentage of the Earth's species, both plant and animal, will have been driven into extinction. By the time you take your first deep breath in the next year, the Earth's climate and biology will have been forever altered by the human influences of the previous year's last moment. In this compressed history, the age of dinosaurs lasted almost 2 weeks. Unless we change our ways dramatically, the age of humans may only last 15 or 20 minutes, and the span of human civilization will fill less than 2 minutes. And beyond this, it raises questions about our social systems. People perceive them as being unchanging and immutable, yet the gender roles that we cherish, the social hierarchy of wealthy versus poor that we are so used to, the religions that we know and love, and even the sexual norms that are accepted by modern society have only been around for the blink of an eye. In many ways, this class will focus on understanding changes in perspectives on race, class, social hierarchy, sexuality, religious beliefs, and systems of thought, and understanding the world around us. It is important to remember that based on the short time period that humans have been around on this planet, nothing is immutable, unchanging, or everlasting. All cultures, peoples, and places are valuable to learn about and understand. And in the end, perhaps your own views and beliefs about what makes a perfect society run may even be challenged or changed based upon the historical knowledge that you garner throughout the semester. After all, isn't the point of education to use factual information to challenge preconceived notions and continue to improve our world? Much of the timeline we have discussed thus far is based upon the theory of evolution. It is important to note that not all students believe in this theory. There may be some students who believe in creationism, or others who believe in a mixture of creationism and evolution. I highly encourage students to explain their unique points of view throughout the class, but also to keep an open mind as well. This kind of diversity of opinion is essential to a truly well-rounded class. That being said, the theory of evolution is important to teach, as it is the general consensus of much of the scientific and historical community. While I don't necessarily require students to uphold any one belief system, I do expect students to understand the basic concepts behind the theory of evolution and the way in which this theory would explain the development of early human history. So according to evolution, life began billions of years ago, when a group of chemicals inadvertently organized themselves into a self-replicating molecule. This tiny molecule then gave rise to everything that has ever lived on the planet. Different and more complex organisms grew through mutation of DNA and natural selection, with the end result, of course, being humans. As is evident in popular media such as television shows, articles circulating on the internet, and even through conversations, many people have several incorrect beliefs about the theory of evolution. The most common misconception is probably that evolution supports the idea that humans evolved from monkeys. Instead, the theory of evolution actually argues that humans share a common ancestor with modern African apes such as gorillas or chimpanzees. That ancestor is often referred to as the missing link and probably existed around 5 to 8 million years ago. Shortly after this, the species diverged into two separate lineages, one to chimps and gorillas and the other to human ancestors, which are called hominids. Approximately a dozen different species of these hominids or human-like creatures existed. Most went extinct without giving rise to other species. However, some are the direct ancestors of Homo sapiens sapiens. While the total number of species that existed and the relationships among them is unknown, unearthing of fossils helps paint the picture more clearly. For the purpose of this lecture, we are just going to look at 3 of the hominids that anthropologists and archaeologists know the most about. So we're going to start with Homo habilis. The name in Latin means handyman, and Homo habilis inhabited parts of sub-Saharan Africa about 2.3 to 1.4 million years ago. As you can see from these pictures, they were rather short, with disproportionately long arms that are reminiscent of apes. They had sloped and protruding faces, and as you can tell from the size of the skeleton here, their cranial capacity was slightly less than half of the size of modern humans, which means that their ability to reason was not quite as developed as modern humans is. And the reason that they got the name Homo habilis or handyman is actually because they were the very first creature to make tools. The second hominid species you should know about is Homo erectus, which means upright man. They got this nickname because they were the first bipedal hominids, meaning that they walked on two legs. Later in the lecture, I will explain the reason why humans finally switched from running around on all fours to walking upright. The story is actually quite a fascinating one. As a hint, it has something to do with a nerdy guy getting the hot girl. So Homo erectus inhabited Africa and spread to India, China, and Java from around 1.3 to 1.8 million years ago. Compared to Homo habilis, they were slightly taller with more proportionate arms. They are also the first hominid species to exemplify sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism is simply the fact that men are typically about 25% larger than females. They also usually have more dense bones and muscle mass. In addition, Homo erectus had less sloped faces and less prominent cheekbones. Their cranial capacity was slightly greater than that of Homo habilis, but still less than modern humans. What makes Homo erectus so unique is that they were the first hominids to use controlled fire, and controlled fire was particularly important for cooking food, keeping warm as humans would move to colder climates, use for slash and burn agriculture, and also for the creation of tools. The last hominid creature for you to know about is Homo sapiens. The name Homo sapien means wise man in Latin, and Homo sapiens are divided into two categories. The smaller of the skulls represents Homo sapien neanderthalensis, and these are the cavemen that you often see on the Geico commercials. The second and larger skull represents Homo sapiens sapiens, and this one should sound familiar as modern humans are actually Homo sapiens sapiens. So Homo sapiens originated in Africa about 200,000 years ago, and they reached full behavioral modernity around 50,000 years ago. They are the tallest of the hominid species. They have more erect body carriage, they have free thumbs for manipulating objects, even less of a sloped face and less prominent cheekbones and brow ridges. And most importantly, they have a highly developed brain that is capable of abstract reasoning, problem solving, rationality, and self-awareness. They also make far greater use of tools than compared to the early Homo habilis hominids. Here is a quick chart that I have created comparing Homo habilis, handyman, to Homo erectus, upright man, to Homo sapiens, wise man. You may wish to write down some of these notes so that you have the information readily available when you take your weekly quiz. One of the questions I often ask my history students is to explain what distinguishes humans from animals. They often list things such as opposable thumbs, the ability to make and use tools, or the capacity for higher reasoning. I find each year that many of them have been misinformed about the capabilities of primates, such as apes and chimpanzees. So before I explain exactly what it is that differentiates human from animals in order to understand early human history, let's take a quick look at a comparison of humans and chimps. Chimpanzees are often incorrectly called monkeys, but they are actually in the great ape family just like us. The other great apes are orangutans and gorillas. There is only one species of human alive at present. As we have discussed, they are Homo sapiens sapiens. In the past, many scientists tried to argue that there were several species of humans and would often hasten to add that they themselves belong to the superior species. However, all humans can produce fertile children, so that means we are all from the same species. Chimpanzees, on the other hand, are actually two species. First, there's the common chimpanzee, and then there's the bonobo. These two types of chimpanzee are completely separate species. And as we discussed before, humans and chimpanzees evolved from a common ancestor between 5 and 7 million years ago. Only fossils of this ancestor remain today. Often my students will explain that one of the great differences between humans and animals is that humans socialize and form a sense of community. Yet the truth is that chimpanzees also spend a great deal of time socializing. Much of their socializing is grooming each other. Juvenile and adolescent chimpanzees will often play with, chase, and tickle each other, as will adults with their offspring. Shows of affection include hugging and kissing, which are done between chimpanzees of any age or gender. Bonobos are especially frisky, and nearly every show of affection is done sexually, regardless of gender. Chimpanzees strengthen friendships by spending extensive time grooming each other. Humans spend a comparable amount of time socializing, albeit more through talking than grooming. Nevertheless, much of the vast amounts of inconsequential chatter we produce is simply a more sophisticated version of chimpanzee grooming. It serves little other purpose than to strengthen our relationship bonds. Humans also demonstrate stronger relationships through physical contact, a pat on the back, a hug, or a friendly shove. Primate social group size closely reflects their brain size. Chimpanzees have about 50 close friends and acquaintances, whereas humans have between 150 and 200. Still, other students argue that humans are the only animals with the ability to talk or communicate with one another. But chimpanzees have complex greetings and communications which depend on the social statuses of the communicating chimps. They communicate verbally using a variety of hoots, grunts, screams, pants, and other vocalizations. Most of their communication, however, is done through gestures and facial expressions. Many of their facial expressions, surprise, grinning, pleading, comforting, are the same as those of humans. However, humans smile by baring their teeth, which is for chimps and many other animals a sign of aggression or danger. A much greater portion of human communication is done through vocalizations. Humans uniquely have complex vocal cords, allowing us a great range of sounds, but preventing us from drinking and breathing simultaneously like chimpanzees can. Moreover, we have more muscular tongues and lips, allowing us accurate manipulations of our voices. This is why we have pointy chins, whereas chimps have receding chins. We attach our many lip muscles to the prominent lower chin, but chimpanzees lack many of these muscles and so do not need a protruding chin. Others will incorrectly argue that only humans can walk upright, but both humans and chimpanzees are capable of walking bipedally on two legs. Chimpanzees will often do this to see further ahead, but they prefer to move on all fours. Humans walk upright since infancy and have evolved bowl-shaped pelvises to support their internal organs while doing so. Chimpanzees, leaning forward during movement, do not need to support their organs with their pelvis, and so they have broader hips. This makes childbirth much easier for chimpanzees than for humans, whose bowl-shaped pelvis is in opposition to a large birth canal. Human feet are straight, with toes at the front to help push directly ahead when walking, whereas chimpanzee feet have opposable big toes and are more like strong hands than feet. They are used for climbing and crawling, involving sideways, diagonal, or rotating movements. It is unsurprising that students often point to the use of tools as something to differentiate humans from animals. For many years, humans were considered to be the only tool-using animal. Observation in 1960 of chimpanzees using sharpened twigs to fish for termites has since changed this belief. Both humans and chimpanzees are able to modify their environment to forage tools to help with daily challenges. Chimpanzees will make spears, use stones as hammers and anvils, and mash leaves into a pulp to use as makeshift sponges. It is thought that as a result of walking upright, our front limbs were much freer to use tools, and we have refined tool use to an art. We live constantly surrounded by the products of this ability, and much of what people consider makes us successful is rooted in our tool making. To further complicate what you thought you knew about animals, have you heard of a gorilla named Koko? Koko is a western lowland gorilla who was born in 1971 and is still living. She is able to understand more than 1,000 signs based on American Sign Language and able to understand about 2,000 words of spoken English. She has lived most of her life in California and was born in the San Francisco Zoo. She is one of the few non-humans known to keep pets. For Christmas in 1983, Koko asked for a cat, and when she was given a lifelike stuffed animal, she was less than satisfied. She did not play with it and continued to sign sad. So on her birthday in July 1984, she was able to choose a kitten from a litter. Coco selected a gray male minx from a litter of abandoned kittens, and because he looked small and like a ball to her, she named him All Ball. Dr. Penny Patterson, who had custody of Coco and organized the Gorilla Foundation, wrote that Coco cared for the kitten as if it were a baby gorilla. Researchers said that she tried to nurse All Ball and was very gentle and loving. They believed the kitten and her skills gained through playing with dolls would be a tool to help Coco learn to nurture an offspring. In December of that same year, All Ball escaped from Coco's cage and was hit and killed by a car. Later, Patterson said that when she signed to Coco that All Ball was gone, Coco signed back, bad, sad, and frown, cry, sad. Patterson also reported later hearing Coco making a sound similar to human weeping. In 1985, Coco was allowed to pick out 2 new kittens from a litter to be her companions. The animals she chose, later named Lipstick and Smokey, were also minxes, just like All Ball. Up next is a video of Coco playing with several kittens who were recently taken to visit her. If you find Coco's story interesting, I recommend checking out the many videos about her on YouTube or going to the Gorilla Foundation at coco.org. In particular, Coco has been in the news recently. She met Robin Williams years ago, and there is footage of her and him wrestling and tickling one another. She loved him so much that when she heard of his recent suicide, she expressed great sadness. On a happier note, here is the video of Coco with her kittens. At this point, we have discussed the fact that most people are misinformed about what makes humans different than animals. Primates like apes and chimpanzees are able to socialize just like us, communicate verbally and non-verbally, use tools, walk on 2 legs, and even express grief and happiness. So what is it then that differentiates humans from animals? Just before humans began moving out of Africa 60,000 years ago, they experienced something called a human revolution. This revolution was when culture became far more important in shaping human behavior than biology. The definition of culture is simply a learned or invented way of living. And cultures are composed of our belief systems, our political and power structures, our myths and our heroes, rituals and routines, organizational structures, and group practices. The day that culture began to influence mankind to behave differently than they were biologically hardwired to do is the day that humankind first differentiated themselves from the animal species. What kinds of uniquely human activities show up in the early African record? In the first place, human beings began to inhabit new environments within Africa, forests and deserts where no hominids had lived before. Accompanying these movements of people were technological innovations of various kinds. Stone blades and points fastened to shafts replaced the earlier hand axes. Tools made from bones appeared, and so did grindstones. Evidence of hunting and fishing, not just the scavenging of dead animals, marks a new phase in human food collection. Settlements were planned around the seasonal movement of game and fish, and patterns of exchange over a distance of almost 200 miles indicate larger networks of human communication. The use of body ornaments, beads, and pigments such as ochre, as well as possible planned burial sites, suggests the kind of social and symbolic behavior that has characterized human activity ever since. All of this occurred before 100,000 years ago, and based on current evidence, long before such activity surfaced elsewhere in the world. At this point, students should have a basic idea of the link between the theory of evolution and early mankind. They should be able to compare early hominids such as Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Homo sapiens. Students should have a working knowledge of primates such as humans, bonobos, and chimpanzees, as well as an understanding of what differentiates mankind from animals and the many links that we share with animals. Finally, you should understand the importance of the development of culture in human societies and the way that early culture expressed itself in various locations. From here, we will look at the ways in which humans migrated to the ends of the earth and how this migration changed their lifestyles, including their housing, subsistence methods, and even social structures.